The 14th of May 1948, the last day of the British Mandate. Britain's legacy to Palestine was a legal system, red pillar boxes, chaos, and war. The same day, David Ben-Gurion announced that the State of Israel would come into existence at midnight. Within hours, the country was under attack.
We heard the explosions, and I said to my wife, the game's on. They're bombing Tel Aviv. Their main targets were the Reading Power Station, the Tel Aviv airfield, the Central Bus Station. And they were really bombing Tel Aviv with impunity because there was nothing to stop them.
That day, 5 Arab states invaded. The Egyptians advanced from the south towards the main Jewish center of Tel Aviv. The Lebanese barely crossed the northern border, with the Syrians attacking at either end of the Sea of Galilee. Further south came the Iraqis, while in the center, Transjordan's Arab Legion advanced towards the west.
So that was a little clip explaining what happened in 1948 when the partition of Palestine began to become a reality. In 1947, the United Nations, that new organization formed after World War II, agreed that Palestine should be partitioned between the Jewish settlement that was there and the Arab people that live there. We'll call them the Palestinian Arabs. And after the partition statement was made, you essentially had the breakout of a war between the Palestinian Arab groups and the Jewish groups inside of Palestine, okay? So you already had this war going on inside Palestine. In 1948 before, and in May 14th, the British said we're leaving, and the Jewish settlement declared itself independent, and this is what's considered the formation of modern Israel. Okay, so modern Israel starts May 1948. At that time, as we saw, other Arab states that surrounded Palestine decided to intervene and also attack the new Israel. Okay, and as we saw, you had attack from Egypt in the south, Jordan to the east, Syria and Lebanon to the north. There was also some Saudi support for Arabs too. So, but ultimately, the Israeli side won. Or at least they won in the sense that they defended themselves enough to establish their independence and a Israel as a sovereign nation. They also, however, won enough to win more territory than they would have originally had, according to the partition. But what was Palestine, the east side of Palestine, or what's called the West Bank, actually went under the control of Jordan after 1948. And that'll be significant leading up to 1967. But you do have Israel formed there. So this is what was split. You can see in the map here. So this becomes Israel, this area here. And this area here, known as the West Bank, right, comes at that time under the control of Jordan here. And this area here was also a territory, the Gaza Strip, that was, it was under the control of Egypt after 1949, up until 1967. But it also had a large number of Palestinian Arabs, so these areas had the most groups of Palestinian Arabs at that time. Also at this time, this area known as the Golan Heights here was part of Syria until 1967 also. So there's just a map of the political Middle East, pretty much the modern. No, this isn't our contemporary. This would be probably, I would say, from the 1980s. Yes, because you have the Soviet Union here. Notice the borders of the Soviet Union. Today, this would be all the stands, and here this would be Ukraine and these other places. So this is the geographic. No, the political map of the Middle East from the 1980s, approximately. Now, a lot of the borders of the Middle East have not changed, however, since this time. But you can kind of get an idea of the sizes here. So, notice the difference between the size of Iraq and Iran here, and how large the Saudi Arabian territory is. So, we probably heard about these countries here, but notice how much larger Iran and Saudi Arabia are. So, big events happen in Egypt. Egypt will play a major role as the leader in Arab nationalism in most of the 20th century. So in 1952, you have the Egyptian Revolution, and the Egyptian Revolution ends the monarchy. There had been a monarchy established in Egypt that the British had helped. In 1952, that monarchy was overthrown by a revolution led primarily by this man. His name was Gamal Abdel Nasser. He was part of a revolutionary group of military officers, and in 1954, he emerged as the leader of Egypt. He had a title president, but in reality, he became, I would say, a semi-dictator of Egypt. And a ruler until his death in 1970. He was a strong Arab nationalist, and Egypt, as I said, became most representative of Arab nationalism. In 1956, an important event happened, known as the Suez Canal crisis. Remember, the Suez Canal is the canal that was built in 1869 that connected or still does connect the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, and ships can go through there. So it's an important shipping point from the Mediterranean into the Red Sea, and then you go through the Red Sea out to the out towards Asia, right? So the British and the French made a deal with the Israelis to basically try to get back control of the canal. And the British and French actually sent paratroops into the canal zone. It ends up being a mini war. Both the United States and the Soviet Union got involved and basically told the British and French to leave. And this made Nasser look like the guy who stood up to the old Western imperialists. And frankly, the British and French looked pretty bad in what they did. So that was an important event in Nasser's rule as president of Egypt. The other thing I want you to notice about under Nasser and Arab nationalism was Nasser rejected Islamism. He was a secularist himself. He supported rights for women. In many ways, he supported what I would call moderate socialist programs in Egypt. He tried to get along with the Soviet Union and the United States to some extent. So he was, and his biggest political opponents within Egypt were actually the Muslim Brotherhood, whom he persecuted pretty ruthlessly. There were Muslim Brotherhood leaders who were arrested, many of them executed, but he rejected the basic idea of a strict enforcement of Islamic law, or what I would call Islamist culture. So that's an important thing to remember. In 1967, you had something called the 6-Day War. This war is very significant because in the 6-Day War, Israel was very successful. They gained control of the West Bank and they gained control of the Golan Heights. They also, as a result of the 6-Day War, actually won control of the whole Sinai Peninsula. Now, they kept this for a while, but eventually gave it back. And we'll see in the next war. But they were extremely successful. Israel, in the 6-Day War, hit all the Egyptian forces that were lined up along the Sinai, along both sides of the Red Sea, and they just surprise attacked the Egyptian Air Force and destroyed most of it. And by the time the Egyptians could respond, the Israelis had taken over most of the Sinai Peninsula. They also took the Golan Heights from Syria, and they took the West Bank from Jordan. So a very successful war for the Israelis. Another war in 1973. Nasser had died by this time, but the new leader of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, initiated an attack across the canal here. It's also known as the Yom Kippur War because it was initiated on the day of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, a Jewish holiday. And at this time, the Egyptians could claim some success because they were able to, after this war, get the Israelis out of the Sinai Peninsula. The Israelis, however, you could basically say it was another Israeli victory. They beat the Syrians again in the Golan Heights. This time the main opponents were the Syrians and the Egyptians. The Jordanians were not as heavily involved, or really not much at all, in the October War. And so another Israeli victory for the most part. Now, in 1979, something really important happened. For a lot of reasons, Egypt and Israel decided to make a peace treaty. One of these reasons was actually the United States became very involved in trying to bring about a negotiation between the two sides. Okay, and it was a very significant event because Egypt had been the main Arab leader since Nasser, and now you had this very important Arab nation making a treaty and recognizing Israel. And so that ended their fight, and they have not fought since. This is a picture of the leader of Egypt at the time. His name was Anwar Sadat here. President of the United States at the time, Jimmy Carter, and the Prime Minister of Israel named Menachem Begin. And Menachem Begin was the first, I guess we'd say, conservative leader of Israel, and had been part of the more extreme nationalist group from early on. But they make this peace deal with the United States brokering it. The United States was at this time getting more and more involved in the Middle East. Part of that was now the importance of oil and gasoline, and I'll be saying more about that in the future. But Israel's relationship with the Arab states becomes an important factor in all these